to Poway.
They just had a shooting at the synagogue.
Victims down inside of the church, and the suspect is nearby with an AR-15.
You were the suspect in custody?
One of my friends, Lori K, is down.
4 individuals were wounded. Sadly, one of the individuals succumbed to their wounds.
I want you to know, this is not Poway. We always walk with our arms around each other, and we will walk through this tragedy with our arms around each other.
The rabbi was one of the individuals that was injured in the shooting.
Here is a young man standing with a rifle, pointing right at me. And I look at him. He had sunglasses on. I couldn't see his eyes. I couldn't see his soul. Lori took the bullet for all of us. She died to protect all of us. She didn't deserve to die. She's such a kind, sweet-hearted, just a good human being. She didn't deserve to die right in front of my eyes.
We shall overcome.
I think that's just what Poway's kind of all about, staying together.
The world isn't supposed to be like this. It's supposed to be peaceful and quiet and...
Yisrael Goldstein, Rabbi.
It is our actions that will counteract these evilness and these dark events. Mrs. Lori K., may your soul rest in peace.
Good evening. Thank you for coming out tonight. I'm Barbara Lee Edwards from CBS News 8, and I'm here with my colleagues Steve Price and Kyle Kraska. I'd like to welcome you all to this Conversation on Healing Town Hall. The reason for tonight's meeting is never something the community wants to have to deal with, but it happened. On April 27th, the peaceful worship of Chabad of Poway was shattered by a gunman. Lori K. lost her life. 3 others were injured. Countless others witnessed the horror. We know many of you and in the community are still processing, trying to figure out how this happened, maybe left traumatized, upset, angry that something like this could occur in our community. Many of us have questions. We want to know what we can do as a community, and that is really why we are here. I would like to introduce our wonderful panel this evening. Dr. Benjamin Maxwell is the Medical Director of Inpatient Psychiatry and a child and adolescent psychiatrist at Rady Children's Hospital, as well as a clinical professor at UC San Diego. Tammy Gillies is the Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Jake Schwartz, Student Board Member of Poway Unified School District from Westview. Dave Lemaster, Principal of Rancho Bernardo High School and parent. Fran Helmerson, Counselor and Crisis Team Leader for Poway Unified. Dr. Susan Ryder with Aurora Behavioral Health. John Ator, Senior Pastor of the Gathering Place Church. And Dr. Jag Lathan, Executive Director of Equity for San Diego County Office of Education. Thank you all for being here this evening. Tonight, we really want to hear from you. We're providing opportunities for the audience to speak as well as submit questions and comments to our panel of experts. We had some questions submitted online for people who RSVP'd to the event, so we will get to those as well. And we also have our team members, Kyle and Steve, are going to move out through the audience with microphones to better address your questions. We want to preface this with a discussion about what this is. It's a conversation. It's not a place to put anyone down. It's not a place to point fingers. We're here tonight to have a productive conversation and a dialogue so that ultimately we can begin the healing process. How do we move forward? How do we do better as a community? We recognize that really we can all be part of that solution. So I would like to start things off now. And anyone from the panel, I would like to encourage to pick this up. It's a question that a lot of people are asking, and that is, how can we combat hate and discrimination as a community?
Well, okay, all right, I'll start. I work at an elementary school as a full-time counselor, and then I help the district in the crisis team leadership. And we need to start early. We need to start early, and we need to continue all the way through 12th grade. Being inclusive, being sure that we are using our empathy skills to look around and find peers, find classmates, find staff on campus that might need some support. Making connections, making positive connections for children, connections on staffs, building that culture of inclusiveness and connectiveness is the beginning of helping people get away from that hate.
I have a question as a parent. I have a 15-year-old, and I want to have a dialogue with him whenever something happens, but at the same time, I don't want to put a fear in him that's going to affect his life. I don't want to take the joy out of life for my teenager, but at the same time, I want him to be aware. And I'm wondering if anybody on the panel has a way of addressing the issue of trying to find that balance. You want your kids to be in the loop, but you don't want it to really affect their day-to-day life. How do you do that as a parent?
I think it's tough to come up with a formulaic response to a challenge that we all face in talking with teenagers, especially 15-year-olds probably know about this. And so they probably have opinions on it. And so the more we can have the 15-year-old, the adolescent, talk about what their feelings are and what their opinions are and what their emotions are on the tragedies that they might come across, I think the more we can allow them to actually find ways of dealing with them. So I think if we can validate their emotions, validate their opinions as real, think about ways that we could support them in finding new ways to cope with the challenges that they see. But most of all, let them talk and not be the one giving advice or judging the emotions that they have based on their own experience.
I think it's also important to recognize that most of our kids probably already know. One of the things that we learned with some of the tragedies that have happened over the last year is we've had, our own CEO has little ones, I call them wee squats, and his youngest is now in the 5th grade, and they were trying to grapple with how do we talk about this with our 5th grader. And she came home and they're like, oh yeah, I came across my feed at school in my, my iPad. And so she had already had the information in her grasp. And I think one of the things that we have to remember as parents and community members is that our kids have a vast wealth of information, and they may have misinformation that we don't know about. But I think the most important thing that you said is the important way we approach it, which is to let our kids know that we're worried about how to talk about it, and that we are concerned, why we're concerned, that we want to put this into perspective so that they don't catastrophize, so they don't become hypervigilant. And at the same time, we also want to talk about how tragic something is and how weighted it is, and how we as a parent care enough that we're going to bring the topic up, and we want to know what they have to say. And our job isn't to create safety for them, because we can't always do that, but to let them know that we can try and create safety in our relationship by letting them know that we're there for them. And if they know that we're vulnerable in that conversation, going, I'm not sure how to even have this conversation with you, but I want to have it, just that little bit of vulnerability opens the door for the child to be authentic and tell us what they're really feeling, because they see we're being human. We are not perfect. And that's an important step for them to be open and honest and imperfect with us.
So just finding a comfortable way to open that dialogue. I'm going to send you guys out to the audience now, and I hope some of our audience members have some question. In the meantime, I did want to ask the panel, again, as a parent, quite often when something happens, the first time something major happened in my children's lives was 9/11. My son wasn't born yet, and I was on my way to drop my daughter off at preschool. And the concept then was, it was such a horrible event. It really was something new. She was so young. I remember the teacher saying, we're just going to try and make the day as pleasant as we can for them and not talk about it too much. Well, obviously that's different when more of these events happen and your kids start getting older. It is frustrating as a parent sometimes when you say to your kids, did you talk about this at school? And sometimes they say, not really. Should there be a plan in place when something like this happens, as soon as it happens, so that they're not turning to social media, they are turning to a human face somebody who's a leader, a teacher, anybody in the school system, should there be a plan in place where the dialogue is started as soon as they get to class?
There is a plan like that. The crisis response team has, everyone has been trained that's on that team. We have trainings every year. There is an overall structure and process. And the day that crisis team members deploy or go to a school site, they start off meeting with the school staff to find out what their needs are. And they start out with a staff meeting. And then the staff has to determine which community members, which students need to hear about this and what do they need to hear, and start with class meetings that the teachers, if they're comfortable to conduct, they will conduct. And if they're not, if it's something like a death of a student, they might want a crisis team member in there with them. So there is a really nice structure, comprehensive structure in place that changes based on the school community and based on the crisis event.
As an 18-year-old student who currently attends a high school, I definitely know that there are programs that are in place. Are they perfection? No. Can they have improvement? Absolutely. But I think they are critical. I want to address the point that was our students know what's going on inside the world, and that's absolutely true, especially for high school students, even middle school students, especially with accessibility to social media, et cetera. When you said that social media is an outlet, really it's because a lot of times they're afraid to have that face-to-face conversation with their parents, especially because a lot of parents don't show that vulnerability, or really they're just afraid to talk to them. So going through social media, they're not talking to a person. They're really showing themselves behind a screen. And really, if you go through the process of really talking to your child, like you said earlier, that I feel like that would steer away from social media. But as for programs in place, there are some, but they can be improved.
But you've witnessed this then firsthand. When a major event has happened, and I'm not talking about after the fact, I'm talking about in that moment, everybody's reading it on their phone, and you start discussing with each other, and those that haven't read it are getting another student's take on what happened, and it goes from there, and that's where the inaccuracies come in.
Absolutely.
Is there something you would like to see happen in that moment when it happens, a response to the breaking news?
There's a fine line, because if we were to have an administrator go on to the intercom and say something, everyone would start freaking out because they think something was happening, because they're afraid. They are essentially scared in that moment in time, because again, it's another reminder of what's a possibility. But really, for it to be addressed as soon as possible without making it seem like an emergency, it would be probably the best way, and really get the facts. And there needs to be time taken to really get the facts, first of all, so they're reliable. And from there, that's the best way to get the information out, is soon.
Do we have any questions in our audience? We would love to hear from you. Kyle, right here.
Yeah, hi. I'm a parent. We are a parent of two boys, 13 and 12. And I want to thank you all for coming. I really appreciate this. It's a conversation of healing, and I think for healing, though, like for us to heal with our kids, I think we have to feel that we're prepared for if this were to happen again at the school. The other day after this happened last week, our 13-year-old, I heard him talking to our 12-year-old about, hey, if there's a shooting on campus, don't hide in the room like they tell you, just run. And honestly, I overheard that. I didn't know what to say. I didn't correct it because, I'm thinking 9/11, people stayed in the buildings. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't really know what the plan is. Maybe that could be better communicated if there is a plan. But it'd be helpful if there was like hey, these are the 5 things to do as a parent, or something along those lines.
Thank you.
So I'm kind of going along with what you were talking about, and going back to the initial question about combating hate and really thinking about healing. I can't help but go to the preventative measures, and also thinking about and discovering what the root causes are. Why are children using violence against other people, whether it's the same group, culturally, ethnically, whatever, or religiously or not? And so I really am thinking about that in terms of, we're talking about like what are the ways in which we can You know, if an emergency happens, if a tragedy happens, like how do we, what is our response? And that is really important. But then also, why is it happening? You know, I think about some of the mass shootings that have happened over the last, decade or so, and really getting underneath, like, how to better support people, thinking about mental health, thinking about why this is actually occurring in the first place, I think would really help us. And I know there's probably plenty of psychiatrists and folks who have done research on it. But I think that can be very helpful. And then also in terms of combating hate, is really thinking about listening to each other. Like, how do we, across difference, across race, across religion, across sexual orientation, whatever it is, how do we begin to listen to each other across difference and be okay with the person who is actually speaking about it, right? We don't need to hate that person because of how they are situated in the world. And so thinking about the classrooms in terms of preparing teachers, preparing staff, preparing administrators to engage in conversations that might feel really uncomfortable, but are needed to have in order for us to really move forward so that our children can have some examples of how to cope and deal with people who might not look like them. Right, who might not have the same experiences as them.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, which is the saying that we find comfort in like-minded people, but we find growth in those that aren't. And I think that for our educators, for parents, we have to really keep that in mind, that we have to be able to have those tough conversations, those open conversations, because our students are reacting a lot to what they hear at home and the bubbles that they create for themselves. And we're in a place in the world where we're all doing that right now, right? We're all in these feedback loops on social media and with our friends, and we only want to hear people validate our own feelings. And this also goes for the haters. They're in that same feedback loop, and it just builds up. So we need to sort of break out of those bubbles and talk to each other and hear from each other. And I know you're asking a different question, so I'm going to pass it on to somebody from school who can respond.
I appreciate the comments that were made, because ultimately, we want to address the issue and the problem where it starts and where it stems, which is where students are and what they're feeling and what they're learning, and how do we make sure that we're providing environments that are safe for our kids and that they can learn to respect one another and value each other and celebrate each other's differences and be a community together where they're not conducting these acts of violence. So that's the root of it. And the proactive piece to it is, in many of our schools, we have, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, we have programs and activities that we bring in to help students learn about each other, and we want them to engage with conversation and get to know each other. And whether you call it Human Relations Conference or Unity Days or whatever we call it at the high school level, it's a constant message and a constant reminder. We also, many of our high schools and middle schools are working with the Anti-Defamation League on becoming no place for hate schools, where we do activities throughout the year to address, thank you, throughout the year to make sure that our students understand that we are a community and we respect one each other and value each other, and we don't tolerate these kinds of behaviors. On the other hand, there are students who need emotional support. They need additional support outside of just school-wide activities and things, and so we do have counselors, and we have members of our community that we work closely with that we can bring in and get additional support. We encourage our staffs to build relationships with kids and to get to know them, to find out what's going on, so that if we do have a student that we're concerned about, we can provide additional supports and interventions to help them get the help that they need before they're in a crisis situation and then acting on these horrible impulses. To answer your original question, in the case that something like that does happen, we absolutely have to have a plan in place, and every school in our district has a safety plan, and in that safety plan it delineates what trainings we provide for our staff and what we're expected to do. And we do trainings with our own students and with our own staff to make sure that they understand what to do in these types of situations. And to be very honest, it's evolving. It evolves with every situation. And we learn, unfortunately, we learn from certain cases and certain situations what worked and what didn't work, and then we work with law enforcement to update our plans, and we have district support to make sure that we're all sharing the same message, to make sure that if ever an event like that were to take place at one of our high schools, middle schools, or elementary schools, we would be able to respond, and our students would be able to react in a manner that's going to maximize their safety. So it really is a multiple-pronged approach to a very complex issue, but at the end of the day, we want our schools to be the safest place. I have 2 kids, one in college and one in high school, and I expect to see them when I come home. I expect them to be home when I get home, and I expect to be able to give them a hug, as do you. And so it's really important that every person on a school campus feels the same way about kids, and we want to make sure that we're doing what we can to provide that safe environment. And schools are safe places, and we remind kids and parents that every day. I tell my kids that all the time. And my daughter in college, she's worried about college type situations, because we saw that at North Carolina just recently. It's something that we continually have to have a conversation with, and it's hard to talk with your kids about, well, what should you do in a situation like that? But unfortunately, we do need to talk with our kids, and the schools do have plans and protocols in places for when those types of things, if they ever do happen.
I'm going to jump in on that for 1 second, because folks may not know. I know a lot of people know ADL for No Place for Hate, but another thing that we do is that we work on security in the Jewish community. And so I'm jumping into the conversation to say that I'm sure that all the schools have excellent plans, but you need to also share those plans with the parents so that when they hear their kids at home talking about should we do this or should we do that, they can actually give them the same information at home that you're providing at the school so that everybody's on the same page. And I'm going to add that, in the Jewish community, we have been walking through gates and security guards for as long as I can remember. When my kids who are in their 20s went to preschool, they went by security guards and gates to get into that Jewish preschool. So this is not new to us. Every Saturday when I go to synagogue, I walk past an armed guard, and I have for 20 years. So this is something that we're really familiar with, and I think that we have to be realistic in the world, that it's not just having kids safe in school, but they need to understand, like when they go to the movie theater, they need to look for the exits. There's an awareness around safety that our kids and we have to have now. I was at the Rock Church on Saturday morning at a conference, and the pastor who started the conference stood up on the stage and said, I just want you to understand that the 2 exits are over here, and that's just the world that we're living in. So it doesn't have to be scary. It can just be a world of, we need to be aware of our surroundings.
Did you want to add to that before I'm going to move back then to the audience, see if we have any more questions?
Just a very quick comment. Originally, the first time I experienced something like this was when Westview had their lockdown. I'm a current Westview student, had their lockdown, and there was no communication that went out to the parents at that point in time. My parents were outside waiting, not knowing what was happening because their child was inside the gates and there was no information being sent out. Kids were actually going to the bathrooms in buckets because we were waiting so long. But since then, we've made some proactive measures, and now we actually have all the resources inside the classrooms. I saw the example when the Rancho Bernardo situation happened a few months ago, that the information was sent out. So students do recognize that that effort is being put towards it, but there's still some improvement that is necessary.
I want to put it back out to the audience now. Do we have any more questions?
Yes, hi. I wanted to kind of go back to the point that the 2 ladies over here were making about understanding differences. And we're somewhat recent transplants to this area, actually from the East Coast, from an area that I would consider to have been much more diverse. And so one of the things I struggle with is, how do we teach our children to appreciate and to understand and to be exposed to all sorts of different types of people when, quite frankly, it seems like in this immediate community at least, and at least in the schools that my kids are in, they're not. I have to say that this year I was kind of appalled. I thought we were well past the time where kids at school were using words that I have heard go around, and I was, quite frankly, I was like, who says that, right? Like, how does a kid even think that, of that? But I do think the representation and the exposure to the diversity is an issue. And so I'm just wondering if anybody has any ideas, or if that's something as a school that you talk about, like how do we let our students know about other groups of people, about other races, other religions that they might not honestly run into on a daily basis?
That is a really good question. And San Diego County Office of Ed, we just hired a director of equity for curriculum and instruction. And part of that role is to really think about what curriculum looks like in schools and in classrooms, so that no matter what the demographic area is, students have access to curriculum that is culturally relevant, either for them or for their peers. I often have this conversation. I used to be a principal in the Bay Area, and I was at a school where it was mostly kids of color. And so a lot of our curriculum was around the students who were in our seats, right? African American, Latinx. We had a Jewish population, we had a pretty diverse population. But I recognize that my colleagues who had schools that were predominantly white did not. And that's pretty disturbing, because kids need exposure to multiple ethnicities, multiple cultures, LGBTQ community. Our kids need to know, in my opinion, right, what's happening in the world that's positive about other cultures. One way that you can do it as a parent, I would say, is this is a beautiful community to live in. I know, Poway. And you can go to, if you worship, go to a church or a synagogue or a temple. Go somewhere that may be more diverse, right? So that your kids can start having interactions with people who may or may not look like them. So that's just one suggestion. There are probably many more. I think when it comes to the curriculum, teachers will need to have some support in terms of how to deliver that curriculum that's in a way that's effective. And sometimes I think in schools we shy away from that, because people don't necessarily know how to react. Teachers aren't always trained, and so they don't know how to have that conversation, and so they stay away from it. But it's the administrator's job as school leaders to say, here is professional learning, so that we can really begin to broaden the curriculum so that students see people who might not look like them, but who have contributed significantly to our American history. If it's anything about African American history, people say African American, yes, and it is American history, right? Jewish history is a Jewish American history. So our kids need to be exposed to the truth about what history has, and so that we can really begin to have some honest conversations, and so that they can see differences.
Go ahead, Steve.
I remember in elementary school preparing for the multicultural nights that they had, and families would bring something from their history, something from where they were from, maybe, or perhaps their grandparents were from, something from their religion, or some other aspect of and I think one thing too to think about is, maybe some people are saying, oh, well, I'm Jewish, or I'm Irish, or, my family was from Africa. But I mean, at the temple that my kids go to, there's some black people and there's some Hispanic people. And, there's more than one category that people fit in. And I think we need to talk about that. But going back to my thought, I hear on the radio, and I hear you guys saying also, it's so easy for us to only find people that, look like us, sound like us, tell us we're fine the way we are. And I think that's good to a degree, right? I mean, people should hear that they're good how they are, right? But at the same time, I think it's good to have somebody you know, maybe challenge some ideas here and there, maybe not all the time, but at least on some kind of basis. And if a particular school doesn't have like a diversity, or if people are choosing clubs, you know, people choose clubs to find something that is similar to what they like, right? So how do you, I mean, is there like some kind of possibility of bringing people from another school and having them do something, or having schools get together and do something? I mean, I'm just trying to think of a way that isn't threatening, because, you know, that defeats the purpose, but that would encourage more communication between students that might have different mindsets, and to somehow celebrate that as a positive thing.
It's an interesting idea, because you're talking about clubs and everything that kids belong to, but what if even on that level you opened up clubs to just more than that school, so that they were interacting more with kids from other parts of the county, maybe areas that they don't even go to, they're not familiar with, just to learn not just what's out there in the world, but what's out there in the rest of your own county that you don't see and hear on a regular basis.
I think it's a really good point, and I think it's an area that we could definitely improve upon. I know we do have some teachers, educators, who are very versed in using technology, so they will reach out to other districts, or they will reach out to, so I have students who will converse with kids in Spain, and they'll do it via whatever platform that they have. I have an assistant, or she used to be an assistant principal here. She's in Washington, and she works in a school that's very diverse, and so she wants to connect with our teachers here and have that cross dialogue, so that it's not maybe a physical, but there's that connection at least there. But your challenge is a really interesting one, in the sense of getting kids together that are not from this community, that are from outside the community, and how do we foster those connections and relationships? And I think it's something to consider and to look into, because I know we have the exchange student programs, and we have kids that come and visit from different places in the world, but how do we get our kids to go out and interact with students that they may not have ever interacted with before? So it's a really good question. I don't know. I know schools have multicultural fairs and things like that, but that's within our own community. That's not something like outside of our community. So it's an interesting point.
It's interesting, because as I was coming in here, I'm seeing the posters from the different theater productions that the school has done. And I know from having done years of theater myself, it's your parents and your friends that come to your theater productions. What if you expanded that, and kids from one school made a field trip to another school to see their production or their concert, and you sort of, you know, even just within the arts and things like that, you experienced what each other's school was all about, what kids there were passionate about, and you did it through common interests like that.
And I think to that point, what we're all talking about is learning from people that are different than we are, so that we can build resilience. And this is an important piece, not just in our day-to-day, but also when we're talking about healing in general, when we're talking about healing from trauma, for example. One of the things that we find at our hospital is when we have students in an intensive outpatient program where they're in a group with other students, one of the reasons that they're there is to learn new coping skills, because we all have coping skills that happen as we're reacting in the moment. And they're not always good, right? They're often bad, and then they can trend towards worse depending upon how panicked we are, right? And the goal of the therapeutic group is to learn better coping skills. And often the best place for them to learn that is from other peers. And the more diverse the peer set and the peer group, the more diversity of coping skills there are for people to learn from. So this not only speaks to kind of that protective side in terms of learning about other individuals so that we can break down those barriers around fear and difference, and recognize that difference doesn't have to be good or bad. It's not right or wrong. It's this and that there's an and as opposed to an or a but. And that we can do that on the proactive side in terms of expanding our community relationships, whether it be through more integration of within school, across schools, in our communities, our families reaching out, us doing more cultural events as a family or as a community group in our own faith communities. but also on the healing and the treatment side as well, because that diversity of experience contributes to the healing of the traumas that we're talking about today. Because today is just as much about healing as it is about protecting us from the next disaster. And part of that healing is recognizing how we balance vigilance without becoming hypervigilant. So how we balance that sense of safety and creating safety by being aware without becoming so catastrophizing and anxious that we can't live because all we do is exist. And I think that's an important piece to the healing process, and it brings us back in that full circle.
I'd really love to hear from some of the kids that are here tonight, too, if anybody has any questions. Young man? We're just going to get Steve to bring the microphone over to you.
So, just from a student's point of view, often when we have these like no place for hate or hashtag be kind assemblies and programs and stuff, a lot of the times I feel like kids don't really take it seriously and they kind of just take it away as jokes and make jokes about it. And I feel like sometimes that doesn't do anything or even makes the situation worse. So how are there ways that we can get kids who may not really care about it to take it more seriously?
That's an excellent question. Turn to the panel for that. I'm sure we've got a few answers.
It's a really good point, and we talk about when we invite guests. Oh, you've got an answer?
Well, I think by looking at this empty room, this is an indication of the lack of communication going on between school, parents, and children. I think there could have been some incentives for kids to come here. I know my daughter has been going to the Chabad of Poway since she was a baby. Not one person has spoken to her at RB High. I'm not here to point fingers, I'm just letting you know. There wasn't an adult greeting kids on Monday. There hasn't been any outreach. The teachers have avoided the topic. So I know you're saying that the teachers are meeting and talking about what to do, but who's talking to these guys? And I know also that teachers don't sign up for this job. So it's hard because you didn't go to school for psychology and you're not in the classroom to talk about shootings, but it's real and it's happening. So I'm saying, I watch Channel 8, but that's how I knew about it. I got the emails, but most parents are working their tails off. They're not talking to their kids. Their kids are like this. The incentive should have been, hey, you can get some extra credit. We're going to have a conversation about this. Whatever it takes. There's no whatever it takes going on. And I appreciate your answer about what to do if there was a shooting, but it wasn't an answer. My children have never gone through a drill. I have 3 kids who've been going to Poway Unified Schools for 9 years. Hasn't happened, but other schools are getting it. So it's there, but it's not being implemented. So again, I'm sorry to be emotional or to point fingers, but there are a lot of things that this nice man is saying could be improved. Like, there needs to be stuff done.
Well, I appreciate the feedback, and I know on 2 different ends, and I do want to respond to your question because it's a valid question as well. But when we do plan these events, we do know that not all the students are always going to take them seriously, and so we do try to follow up with different activities and things throughout the year, like our Human Relations Conference that we do with our sophomores, and then also too with the No Place for Hate activities that we have within our classrooms. So trying to get that personal touch, trying to make sure that we're not just addressing a larger audience, but we're actually talking with individual students. And I actually led the No Place for Hate activity the other day on genocide and actually collected the reflections from the students, and they did a really masterful job of connecting the pyramid of hate that we went through and how these incidences of bias and prejudice and discrimination lead to acts of genocide throughout history, and then how do we stop that? And the students drew those connections that it's the bias, it's the jokes, it's the memes, it's the things that we say that we think are funny because we're not taking these things seriously that ultimately lead to that. So I think it's a really valid point, and I appreciate that perspective. As far as addressing it from what happened at the synagogue, we did meet as a staff first thing in the morning, and checking in on the teachers and the staff is just as important as checking in on the kids. And so not having an adult at the front of the school, I apologize. We were working with the staff to see who needed help, who needed support. We had staff members who were struggling with it just as much as the kids, and then trying to message that what can we do within the classrooms to support the students. I did hear many teachers were talking about it. If it didn't happen in specific classrooms, I couldn't address that. I can address that individually, but I do know teachers were talking about it. I know kids were talking about it, and it was handled in a way that we're trying to be respectful of the students, and at the same time making sure that they knew that we were here for them, and they could talk and they could share their opinions. As far as the drills are concerned, we do have drills at the beginning of the school year and at the end of the school year. So I don't know if the drill, if that was missed, but we do have a site safety plan. I mentioned that earlier. It outlines when we have the safety drills. We do lockdown drills. We do evacuations. We did have our drills in the fall. We have them planned for the spring. We do them twice a year. Do we need to do them more often? Perhaps that's something that needs to come out of that, but we do those things. And again, in these types of situations, we're working with the entire community, students and staff, to try to make sure everyone's okay and that we can learn and get through the day and the weeks ahead. And to be honest, it's ongoing. This is a continual thing. I check in on students and staff all the time, and I think it's something that we can continue to do. And in areas where we need to get better, then we can do that as well. So I appreciate you bringing that forward.
It's an interesting point, the concept of drills, because I know when we were all little, we remember having fire drills on a regular basis. I don't ever remember being concerned about my school actually catching fire or anyone else's, but we did the drills on a regular basis. We all knew what was going on. We talked about it. It seems that this is the new fire drill, and it needs to be something that's just you have the drill, but everybody already knows what to do, and there's a dialogue about it in between. It's just today's reality.
I was just going to add that you mentioned that teachers weren't trained to, teachers don't necessarily have, every teacher is different on the amount of experience that they have dealing with these issues, working with these issues. And students sometimes can see that teachers are visibly upset, visibly uncomfortable, and they're humans too, and it's really just a matter of working together to really solve the issue. But really the main problem is that we need some time. I really see that teachers need time. Staff need time to really get through this issue, but working hard, I'm sure we can get there. But I just wanted to address that specific point that teachers too are struggling.
And I just want to validate your feelings on this, because I spent Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night at 3 different synagogues, and I can't tell you how many parents and students came up to me and said, "I'm so hurt, my teacher never said anything to me." And that's from across the county, not here, but I mean, everywhere I was out. In East County, I was in La Jolla. I think that a lot of times teachers, they want to, they don't know how to address it, and they don't necessarily want to pull the 1 or 2 Jewish kids in the class and say, like, "I'm so sorry that this happened in your community." So I don't think that it's malicious, which doesn't make it right, but I do think we're challenged with how we talk about tragic situations.
How do you address that challenge, somebody within the school system? If you're going to start, then that takes us back to the issue of taking some sort of action, opening the dialogue right away as soon as the kids come in on Monday. How do you address that challenge to make everybody feel comfortable so that there is a generally accepted way of dealing with it? Instead of people being left to guess, I think that's what really scares people, is the possibility of making a mistake. It needs to be sort of removed, and they need to feel comfortable.
Right. I mean, it's different for different levels. When you're talking about an elementary level, there are kindergarten and first grade and second grade parents that don't want their children to have a conversation about that at school. So that's one of the delicate balances. You're talking about middle and high school, that's different. What happened at the elementary level is something came out from our district leadership that gave us a script of what we could, not a script, but a guideline of what could be discussed in the classroom that would meet the needs of the entire student body of 700 students or 800 students. And then teachers and staff are trained to be able to identify if there are individual students that are really struggling with that information. And that's where having a crisis team on campus helps, because then those students can go work one-on-one or work in a group setting with a trained counselor. So there was something that went elementary-wise. Again, middle and high school, there was also some suggestions and guidelines, but it's so impacted by what they come in with already, the information that they already have.
And just to kind of go back to your statement as well, I can definitely empathize with you. And teachers oftentimes, I used to be a teacher as well, aren't provided professional learning or training in their programs when they're learning how to be teachers about how to deal with either crisis or just on a daily basis how to really have conversations or structures for that. Schools oftentimes also don't have infrastructures, and I'm not talking about Poway, but I've worked across the state. So infrastructures like every classroom has community circle. I think you talked about that, where it's normal for kids to sit and talk about what's happening, whether it's something that's happening in their community, something that's happening on campus, and not because of a tragedy, just because we get together and we have conversations about what's happening socially in the world. Oftentimes we avoid that in education, and we want to stick to the curriculum, to the actual textbook, and what's happening every day is important to kids, and we don't always acknowledge that or recognize that. So I think as we begin to think about our teacher induction programs, as we think about our school day, is how do we begin to build our day so that kids are actually heard and listening to each other, in addition to the everyday curriculum that we have. But our curriculum can actually be revised so that it includes the present day what's happening. And so I think that that's part of it, and really helping administrators and teachers to be comfortable. And one thing I heard someone say is, we don't have all the answers, and I think that is a beautiful place to be when we don't have all the answers, because then we're more open to listen to other people and their perspectives. So even if a teacher or a parent or a student does not have the answer, that's okay. Be vulnerable and talk to other folks to see what they're thinking. So as soon as we can get in that space, then I think we may be in a better place to really listen to each other.
We have another question from our audience. Yes,
Hi,
go ahead.
Thank you for being here. A couple of things. One, on April 5th, I'm a parent of I'm a parent of a second grader at one of the Poway Unified Schools, Design 39 campus. On April 5th, I received a text message indicating that the school is on secured campus mode due to a threat from a student, and that police were investigating. I myself am a survivor of the Las Vegas mass shooting. So for me, something like that, and I'm very sorry for what's happened in our community. I graduated from RBHS. I went into complete panic mode because I have the PTSD. So for me, not understanding, and thank you for mentioning the plans earlier, the communications, I didn't know what secure campus meant. So, of course, the worst came to my mind, that something terrible had happened on campus. There was no indication in the text message that I received that the children were safe. So that would be something that I highly recommend be added to that, to ensure that parents like myself, any parent in the room or in our school district, panic about the safety of our children. Second, being a survivor myself, I've been going through what's called dialectical behavioral therapy, which is phenomenal. It addresses, distress tolerance and emotion regulation, things like mindfulness and such, which I, as an adult, as I'm learning through and gaining these coping skills to get me through my days following a tragedy, I almost think to myself, wouldn't this be nice if we actually learned these skills as kids? So for me, I would consider that, given the world that we live in, to be able to have some sort of knowledge of these skills so that children like my second grader, who wasn't even aware of the secure campus mode, which is good and bad, I was aware. So when I asked him what had happened at school that day, he said, oh, nothing different. But for me, so that made me have to make the decision of, do I discuss it, do I not discuss it? But it is an open discussion in our household given the circumstances. But anyway, giving him the tools as a young child to be able to practice those throughout his lifetime, I think that would be significant in how our children live their lives going forward.
Just getting back to the information you got from the school and the text message, it sounds like what wasn't in the message really sparked fear more than what was sent to you. And it would have been good for you to know that, by the way, the children aren't aware of this. This is just something we're dealing with, because that sort of put you in an awkward position as well, because you brought it up and your child was unaware. So it just seems like there's a breakdown in the communication of the emergency information right there.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process for us, and we're learning as we go along and getting more explicit with knowing what parents need and what students need. And as far as those skills, though, those are starting in kindergarten at our elementary schools. Teaching empathy, problem solving, emotion management, skills for learning, using restorative justice. So students are getting those in whole classroom lessons from counselors and also follow-up lessons with teachers. There's also lessons like that in middle school where counselors are going into middle school classrooms and teaching, problem-solving skills with each other, working things out, how to manage and cope and build resiliency. So that is happening. Your child might not be talking about it, but it is happening.
And at the high school level as well, and some middle schools, we actually have a period of time called homeroom. Homeroom is kind of a controversial topic at this point in time, but homeroom is, the purpose of it is to be that mental release and to learn about these very, very, very important concepts. And I know from my school specifically, we're going through that process of finding that correct curriculum, what works best, especially in what appeals to students, and that's still in the process. But I know from a student's perspective, since a lot of these programs that you mentioned right there don't necessarily spark or don't allow students to necessarily remember as strongly, we're trying to really emphasize the importance by going every single week and putting that curriculum in through homeroom.
Yeah, I'll add to that. We, and thanks to the County Office of Education, but there's an excellent resource training. It's a 2-day training for our staff where it's restorative practices. And so we've sent many of our teachers, administrators, counselors, even office staff to this training. And it's a 2-day intensive training around how to create environments where you can build relationships with each other, get to know each other, break down some of those barriers. And a lot of it is done in kind of circular discussions where you're in a room and you're talking to each other, and there's some protocols and things that they follow. But at the end of the day, what happens is you build a community within a classroom. And we've started doing that. And even that morning when we brought the staff together first thing in the morning, I'd never done this before, but I put them in a circle, and they walked in, and we had open conversations about how are we going to address this, and how are we going to support kids, and what do we need to do, and encourage them to do those same things. We many of our schools, including ourselves, are now starting to offer what's called a positive and psychology wellness class. So we have Eric Martin in the room, and he's teaching this class. He just started teaching it this year, and it really is just about positive decisions and healthy choices and growth mindset, and how do you continue those skill sets that you're learning from the elementary and middle schools into the high school and into your adult years. And it's an elective. Kids are taking it, and they're really open to it and receiving it. And I know other schools are talking about adding it. So there's multiple ways that we're trying to continue that learning that's taking place at the elementary school all the way up through high school.
I'd like to respond to the lady over here that talked about the addressing your children. I want to speak from the faith community's standpoint to the Jewish community. And it's not for the children, but for the rabbis. And so some very positive things that are coming out of this tragedy is the unity has increased. So like I got a phone call like immediately after the shooting. And I was able to send an email out to a network of spiritual leaders in the region. Within 2 hours, we had the vigil prepared at the RB Presbyterian Church, and we hosted it for the Jewish community. It was so beautiful. There were 1,000 people that came. And the Jewish community came, and we let them run it. And they sang, and we lit candles, and we loved on them. And they said how medicinal that was for them. Then the next day, I am a non-denominational pastor, but I had breakfast with a rabbi, Rabbi David from here in Poway. And to my left was a Presbyterian pastor, and there was a Catholic pastor, or a priest, another Catholic priest, Episcopal priest across from me, and a Methodist pastor. And I only knew one of these men before that day. And we all exchanged phone numbers, and we were going to spend more time together. The next day, I was in a meeting with about 20 pastors in this region, and we talked about how we increase the unity in our region. But that unity between the churches, multi-denominational, cross-denominational, we've been building this for 20 years. So to be able to just send out one email and watch this conversation among the faith community happen and put something together within 2 hours is part of the healing process. I think unity is part of the healing process. And now that unity is reaching across not just denominations within the Christian faith, but across faiths. And so I was so thankful for the love that was shown to the Jewish community from the Christian community. And in this meeting Saturday night, there were people from the Islamic community, the Jewish community, the Christian community. And it was genuine outpouring of love. So that's very positive and very hopeful. And to this young man here that asked about how do you get some of these knuckleheads to care, right? I have 6 teenagers. I have 5 at home, a 13-year-old and 3 15-year-olds and a 17-year-old. And so first I'm on medication, but no. But it really is about what's happening at home. And so in the faith community and the public school district have partnered together for the last 7 or 8 years on what I wish my parents knew, because really the condition that the kid leaves the home with is what he enters the school campus with. And so having a home that is a no-hate place. I mean, my family is unique. I mean, I married a Hispanic and adopted a child from Africa who's special needs, adopted a child from Asia who's special needs, and then I have 4 bios. And so when we walk into a restaurant, we're just like a freak show. I mean, people just like, they can't put us together. But the message at home is just so critical. And for you to be here, and to be here with, I'm assuming this is your mom next to you, is just a beautiful thing. And the same over here. It really does begin in the home, and I think that's where the attitudes are shaped. So we are making progress.
But that would be ideally, it begins in the home, and we also have to acknowledge the fact that that's not always the case, and that is obviously where the school system comes in too, and the dialogue here this evening. You wanted to add something, go ahead.
I think I want to give a shameless plug to mental health as well. And it's not because I'm merely a mental health provider. But you were talking about dialectic behavioral therapy and the pillars of dialectic behavioral therapy in terms of mindfulness and distress tolerance and affect regulation. And it's so interesting to me that we talk a lot about mind, body, spirit. But when it comes to mental health, we only talk about it in the context of reacting to tragedy and trauma and mental illness. And those very skills that you're talking about are skills that we can employ every day in our lives to help us deal with the day-to-day drudgeries and the day-to-day stress and the barrage of negative information that we get from the internet and every screen that we come across. And they're so vital, and yet we wait until we've had so much tragedy that we can't tolerate it anymore, or we're so sad that we can't get out of bed, or we're too anxious to go back to school, or we're engaging in repetitive behaviors like mindless eating and we've put on 25 pounds and then we're purging on top of it, or we've developed PTSD, or we've developed some sort of mental health disorder that is now diagnosable. I want to encourage people to reach out to the mental health community before tragedy strikes. You don't have to seek mental health services just when you have clinical depression, clinical anxiety, clinical PTSD. You can seek mental health services for family therapy, for couples counseling, for individual therapy. I say this as a therapist who has a therapist, right? And I don't have a therapist because my patients are driving me crazy. I have a therapist because I have a life that drives me nuts, right? And I need to replenish and revise and revisit my own coping skills. I wouldn't be able to do the work that I do and be that asset to the community if I didn't have that support network for myself. And one of the things that we've done in our hospital is reach out to the schools. We've been working with all the school counselors. I've been on most of the school campuses working with the staff to teach them those skills that they don't get in teacher training on empathy, listening, mindfulness, so that they can bring them into the classroom because they know their students. Me coming in as a stranger one time to talk to the student isn't necessarily as helpful as the teacher that they know, that they love, that they trust, talking to them, and then having those skills. And we need to pay as much attention to our minds and our psyches as we do to our spirits and our bodies, and really pay attention to that emotional connection. That resilience is key. We don't get it through a screen. I ask parents and I ask teachers and all of the folks that have been in any of my presentations, I ask them the same question. They all think I'm joking with them and that I'm tricking them. And I say to them, what does HUGS mean if you get it in a text? And everyone stops and they get quiet and they're like, I don't know. I said, it means someone's getting you a hug. Ding dong, like really, someone's sending you a hug. And then they look at me and I say, is it the same as someone embracing you? When you're in a therapeutic situation and you're learning those skills, you're not only being embraced by a professional who has the skills to teach you, you're learning how to embrace yourself and your families in a way that's meaningful and protective. We have to start there.
Did you have somebody with a question, Kyle?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Oliver Rhodes, and I want to address everybody, particularly the young people. I'm 71 years young. I served in Vietnam, 21 years in the service, and I was very passionate about working with young people. I was disheartened to see my fellow comrades who didn't die in Vietnam dying on the streets of the United States of America. So I graduated from San Diego State University with honors in recreation therapy with emphasis in the most incredible discovery ever, the power of God. Each and every one of us have a portion of God's power. Each and every one of us have a responsibility in this world to set the example, because the one word that truly exemplifies leadership is example. You see, our kids are watching us. It's not the kids that's destroying the world. It's the adults. I watched that and I said, I'm giving up my adult card. I'm going back to being a kid. And I'm still doing cartwheels. I'm a hula hoop champion, a senior Olympic gold medalist. Street therapy is the biggest game in town. This is also my research designed for my dissertation. This is a game that brings us together in the spirit of play instead of the atrocities of dismay. We've got to stop all this crazy adult behavior. This is a game plan. This is an action plan. I have put this out here so many times, 30 years in the making. I worked in many hospitals, treatment centers, recovery homes, skilled nursing facilities, and I have been very passionate. But the thing that really hurt me more than anything was that I was always told things like, Ollie, you need to tone down your enthusiasm. You're getting too many people, too healthy, too fast. I was appalled. I looked around the world and I said, look at the evidence. Look at our world out here today, ladies and gentlemen. I want to cry sometime when I see that we are perfect in every way. God made us in his image, and he would not have made us less than perfect. So where's the anomaly? We were not designed to be treated by capitalistic professionals. Every time I do my workshops and presentations, I'm a published author. I've spoken to thousands of people over the years. And I look at the people out here and I say, prove otherwise. Prove me wrong. We all have a portion of God's power, and the power of God can only be used to do good. Anytime we do anything to value the sanctity of our spiritual domain, this thing here, our true nature, then we're playing this game in vain. So this game plan says, get the therapy and experience the clarity and spiritual health, healing, and prosperity. Therapy is not what we do for others or what others do for us. It's what we do for our spiritual self. So everything we do out on the streets, just make it therapeutic. I speak several different languages. Every country I went to, not one problem. If our leaders were to learn different languages and go to different countries, we'll see a smile, and we'll get a smile in tune back. Because the way a mirror reflects our facial and physical features, so does the eyes of others reflect the warmth, the coldness that we ourselves in me. Children, do not grow up. It's a trap. I tell you, stay young. Don't let anybody waltz into your head and tell you you're sick, because there's nothing wrong with us whatsoever. Play this game. If you want a copy of this, I'd be more than happy to send it to you. This is a play revolution, not an industrial revolution, not a technological revolution. This is what we need right now. Get the therapy for spiritual health, healing, and prosperity until we can all come together and play this game in God's name and in high enough numbers to make it a game changer. We can advance the evolution of human potential in every aspect of our lives.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I see that we have some students that would like to also ask some questions. Kyle, right down here.
Hi, my name is Ellie Zeiler, and I go to RB High School. I'm a freshman, and I'd like to say that as a teenager in high school, that discrimination is completely real, and that my best friends and I, we face being discriminated against as Jews on a daily basis, and we would like to say that even that if we had an assembly or if our teachers talked about this to us, it doesn't have to be a religious thing, a controversial thing. It really just has to say, describe that we all want to be loved and accepted, and that we all share this world, and that we all need to treat others with kindness and respect, and that we aren't separated by religion, and it just doesn't need to be controversial, or no one should be scared for someone to disagree.
Can I just ask you, because that's such a beautiful point, you obviously feel that's not happening right now. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
What would you like to see happen? Would you like to see more of that message in school assemblies? What would you like to see when you talk about the problem among yourselves? What would you guys like to see?
Well, first off, my friend Sophie and Lil and I, we are creating something called Together as One, and it's kind of a group by teenagers for teenagers, and it's that the teachers should be saying it, and that we, implementing a 60 seconds of silence in the beginning of school, it would be great if our teachers just, most kids don't know what to do with 60 seconds. They probably will waste it. And so if our teachers said something like, think about what you want at the end of the day, what would you like to be? Every single person wants to be loved, and today you should think about how you can make someone else feel better and make someone else's day.
Thank you. Thank you. We have another student down here. I'd like to hear from her as well.
Hi, I'm Sophie Bolgan. I'm a 9th grader at Del Norte, and from a teenager's point of view, we don't, when we talk to each other, we don't want to be judged by each other, and just when we're in a classroom, we don't know how to share our feelings without having another kid make a joke later, say, wow, I'm sorry. We don't want pity either. We just want to know how we can communicate with each other and how we can communicate with teachers in a way that we're not being judged, or we're not we just want to communicate. We just want to talk to each other in a way we're all friends.
Do you feel your teachers get that, or do you feel that this is a message they're not getting?
I feel like my teachers don't really understand. I feel like they, like Ellie said, they think that we all want to come from a religious point of view, or a point of view that not all of us understand. Whereas I feel that we just need to come from a point where we're all just talking and just understanding each other's point of views, understanding how we can fix the situation and prevent it so it doesn't happen again.
Do you want better communication, but you want that ground rule of respect out there first so that you can all express yourselves?
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Did you have something else? I'll just go over here first, and then I'll get to you. Go ahead, ma'am.
And I'm almost wanting to pass it to her because she's been waiting longer than I. Okay, thank you. I am also a psychologist, and I live just blocks from here. I could have walked to the facility. I am also a veteran and a mother of 6 children that I raised from birth to college, homeschool, and 6 in 9 years. So I kind of feel like maybe I should also get that crazy hat or take the drugs. But my point is, I want to really address the 2 panelists on the end, because I think I want to revisit one, sitting with discomfort. And the second thing is the young lady here with her children, who I think you were the one that transferred from the East Coast. And your son, his comment. So I want to also address, so I have a lot since it started. Sitting with discomfort. And an example I noticed was tonight. So the family over here with the teenagers, the mom started, and what she said was very impacting. And I'm giving you an example. This is not to point fingers, but I want you to understand what happened in the room. What she got was a defense of the system. It wasn't a clear hearing of what she said. It was almost like we needed to take a moment and digest what she said. And when you're not heard, it's frustration. It's like, why come, why speak when I'm speaking and you're not listening? So mindfulness is a wonderful resource because it encourages us to sit and listen, not while we're processing what we're going to say, but listen from the heart. So I don't know that either her or her children were heard, because they're saying, I'm not getting this, and I'm sitting in this school or another school or the classrooms, and this is not my experience. And what I heard was, oh yeah, but we're doing all of that. So it's almost like contradicting them and telling them that your experience isn't real. So that's an example that they hear, they see, and all of these children in here see that they're not really being heard. So I really want to encourage us just to start listening, not from a defense mechanism where we're already programming our answer, but listening from the heart to be heard. The next thing thank you. Thank you. My other suggestion is building on something that was already said, and that is, I heard someone say, well, we gave an assembly and I presented, I think it was something regarding maybe the Holocaust or something like that. That's not, in my opinion, effective. When you want to teach a person about something, the most important person to teach it is the person. So why not have a group of Jewish students come forward and teach an assembly on the Jewish Holocaust? When you want to talk about bringing in teaching on other ethnicities, get the students who are experiencing that to speak on that, because now they're the experts, not the teachers, not the administration. It's the teachers, it's the students, excuse me, if that's who you're going for. And if you are concerned about school shootings, invite some of these students that have been a part of school shootings. If you really want to get the students to buy in to the importance of this. They will buy into another peer telling them of their experience. So as you, and I'm so grateful that you were sitting here with us, but as you shared your experience, that touched me. I'm sure it touched everyone in this room. How effective would it be if a student from one of these schools that have been affected were to come in and speak at an assembly? Would you be affected? Yeah. So we need to take it back to them. Thank you.
Thank you. She mentioned this other woman has been waiting quite a while to ask a question as well, or share some thoughts with us.
I'm just so grateful to be here tonight. Just echoing the same conversation that was going on over there, and also echoing what this fine lady had just said so beautifully. Judging the lack of attendance in this room, I can tell you a lot of my Muslim friends and Muslim parents are not here because Ramadan started yesterday. Today is the second day of Ramadan, and we break our fast at 7:36, and there is a prayer service. So most of my friends did not make it here, but they wanted to be here tonight. So it's important to be aware, just to be aware, because those parents that are not here, those have children in the schools that are also fasting. So just to start having that awareness of the children who are present is really, really important. So they are being heard. And yes, the place to come from empathy is always good. We need to listen to each other. As she just said, we just need to start listening. What our kids are going through, what they're feeling, what they want to see. And I respect all the leaders that are sitting here. I have a college kid and a kid in 10th grade, so I know Powell Unified School District very, very well. It's a great school district. But let's start listening to our kids and hearing them and understanding where they're coming from and what they're going through. That will be appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Steve, I know this young man that made that point that resonated with so many people earlier would like to say something again if we can get the microphone over to him.
Barb,
right here?
Barb, in the meantime.
Oh, in the meantime, Kyle, go ahead.
Moving
Yes.
over, go ahead.
I'm speaking as a 14-year-old 8th grade student, and I have noticed recently an increase in hate speech among people my age recently. And I mean, I personally feel ashamed to be a part of a group of people who say hateful things and do hateful things. But the Monday after the shooting, I had a very interesting conversation with some of my fellow peers who I feel really do still care about making a difference. And we talked about how powerless we really feel as we watch these things going on around us and as we hear about people at our school saying hateful things. So I guess my question to the panel is, what would you suggest we as children do to show our support and to let people know, both kids our age and adults, that these kinds of things really matter and that what they say and do matter?
It's a great question.
That was put to the panel if anyone would like to pick that up.
Thanks. I'm just going to respond around our No Place for Hate program, because that is student-led. So it is the students that drive that in each and every school. They're the ones that decide the programs, what matters to them in their school, and they're supported by counselors or educators, but it's all student-driven, and we found that that is the most impactful way. The students have to feel empowered. I want to just also address this gentleman that for the most part, assemblies, in my experience of 12 years doing this, don't really work. We do a program through No Place for Hate that's peer training. So we train a group of traditional and non-traditional leaders in the school, and those students go out and train other peers, because we know that students listen to each other much more than they listen to the adults. And that impact of those peer leaders can really change the culture of a school. And I think, as the principal was saying, it's not just about one day or one assembly, it's throughout the year. What are you doing? What are the students leading? And maybe I'll turn this one over to you, but what are the students leading to make change in their own school? And students have power. Don't underestimate the power of students. So you do need to band together. You do need to choose your friends. You can start a No Place for Hate club. You can start a diversity club. You can bring people together. You do have the power. One person can make a difference.
Some more questions down here as well, just to move this along a little.
The young lady, I thought it was very brave that her group of friends got together and decided to have this conversation on their own, and you should be commended for doing that. It's very brave of you. Please give her a round of applause. To take such a tragic situation and for these young people to want to get together and denounce this type of behavior, and I think we should give them the support. And maybe someone on the panel can suggest what's the next step there. It's great that the kids want to do that on their own, but how can you empower them to take that to the next level? Anyone, please?
Yeah, first of all, even though I'm one principal at one of our 39 schools, I think I can speak on behalf of all of the principals and administrators. When we hear students share what you just shared with us, and I'm referring to both the student at RB and the student at Del Norte and the student in middle school, it breaks our heart. And I'm sorry. I really am. And we all hurt when these things happen. And when we hear about incidences where discrimination is taking place, or we hear that students are using language, or an event like this happens and they're joking about it, it crushes us to our core. And I don't say that because I want sympathy. I want to express that it is one of those things that we hate. and as we seek to be no places for hate, we don't want that experience for our kids. We want our students to come to school and feel valued and feel part of the community and not have to experience that. And so on behalf of all of the principals, administrators, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that happens, and I'm sorry that you have that experience. And the question is a great question. What can we do? What can the students do? And I know when students come and talk with me, if they have an idea or something that they want to do, they want to create a club, or they want to do a campaign, or they want to start something on campus, we will do everything we can to support that initiative. And whether it's finding an advisor or finding out what we need to do through ASB, or whatever it is, whatever that looks like, whatever that idea is, and just listening to your idea about the organization that you want to create, I would love to sit down and talk with you and find out what can we do to support you, what resources are available to help make this thing happen. You mentioned the moment of silence. I actually met with the Rabbi Goldstein, his son, and they presented, and Kobe, and he presented the moment of silence. And so I know the principals are going to bring it back and say, hey, this is something that our community has talked about, doing a moment of silence every day. So those are great things. And so every idea, every initiative, everything that you want to do that you see as a solution, your principals, your teachers, your administrators, they're going to support that, and we're going to want to help you in whatever ways that we can. So I don't have that magic answer. I don't. But I would love to hear more, and I know I speak for all the administrators that we would love to see that happen and how we can support our kids. Now, Jake, if you want to respond.
Yeah, I just want a really quick answer. I want to address the three girls and you in the back. I apologize, I don't know your name. But I completely relate to what you're saying. I'm a student too, and a lot of the language that I experience, at least, is in a joking manner. It's not necessarily with a malicious intent, but that does not mean it's any less offensive. And what I really want to highlight is that what I've found in my experience is that starting these programs can sometimes be way more difficult than it is easy. And it should really be so easy to start these programs and be able to establish these positive programs throughout campus, so you can encourage this positive and good behavior and positivity throughout all campuses. That should be easy. And I really find that a lot of the times it's not that easy. And I relate to what you're saying, and I respect. I would have never stood up if I like. I would have been so nervous if I was you. So thank you.
Yeah. More from our audience.
Hi, my name is Jenny, and I just want to touch on and clarify for the girls that had the courage to stand up and speak. And I'd like to talk to the PUSD panel specifically and say, because it's a conversation for healing, and healing starts with feeling empowered. And we teach our kids, if you see something, say something. But there's a gap, and it starts right there. What happens when they say something? And I'd really like to send them with something solid. I'd like to send them home with something really tangible. What does happen when they say something? What is the district policy on hate speech? What's the spectrum of what's tolerable and what's not tolerable? Because we're all feeling like we really want to put our arms around our Jewish community now and be extra vigilant about the anti-Semitism and the racism that I assure you is happening every day in classrooms. So just for clarification, what is the policy on hate speech? What are the action steps so that when we teach them to say something, what's the follow-up? What will happen if they say something?
It's a great question, and I'm going to basically say it is unacceptable. Like, there is no tolerance for it. And we do talk a lot about if you see something, say something. And we do encourage our kids to come forward and say things. So the question is, what happens next? So it's a great question. So we will take every situation that comes to us very seriously. We will take it and we will treat each one uniquely. And we will look into everything that our students bring to us, and we will involve any and all resources that we need to address it to its fullest extent. And I say that in a way because it may be a insensitive comment like Jake was referring to, or it may be some discriminatory statement that was made, or it may be hate speech, or it may be hate violent speech. There's a range of responses that come along with these incidences. And when they occur on our campus, we are going to respond immediately, quickly. We're going to respond thoroughly. We're going to collect as much information as we can and investigate. We're going to involve law enforcement from the very get-go. If it's something that's rising to that level where we need to involve our sheriff resource officers or police resource officers, depending on where we are in the district, we will reach out to our district support services to make sure that what do we need to be looking at? Is this, we have different determinations in terms of it's an insensitive or inappropriate comment versus it's a derogatory statement or a racist statement or insensitive comment with the absence of causing or threatening to cause harm, and then does it rise to the level of, no, it's actually hate speech and or hate violence. And the consequences can be a wide range of consequences, up to and including expulsion from our district. And I know we've had cases where we've had to do that, and we've had to involve law enforcement. So we take them very seriously. I know students sometimes are very reluctant to come forward, and we encourage them. There's this word called, I don't want to be a snitch, and we assure them that, A, your statement to us is confidential, and at the end of the day, if we don't address it on our end, then it's only going to continue. And so we do want to make sure we're taking every situation seriously. We follow up on it, we investigate it, we involve the resources that we have at our disposal, and then we determine to what extent do we need to issue any kind of corrective action for that particular offense, and that can be a wide range of things, up to and including expulsion from our district. So we take it very, very seriously.
So I'm not a district person. I work for the County Office of Education, and just thinking about what the lady in the red talked about in terms of being uncomfortable and sitting in discomfort. If you haven't heard of Brene Brown, she's an awesome person to kind of learn from about empathy work and being vulnerable. But I think part of the issue is, one is being punitive to children, even adults, isn't always helpful. And so really thinking about how we approach it in terms of a conversation, and saying that when you say things that are homophobic, racist, anti-Semitism, whatever it is, it's unacceptable, right? That's not okay, and we need to stop that behavior. But somehow our schools, and I'm talking from the perspective of a former principal and teacher, and our society now, we're breeding hate in our rhetoric, in our conversations. So it's really beginning to think about how to engage students and how to, like she was saying, like to allow them to have conversations. We don't talk about real things in school. That's just the bottom line. We talk about what happened in 1920, whatever, right? And we're not talking about today. We're not talking about consistently in our systems, like what does that mean to say a homophobic slur? How does that hurt people? Let's talk about that, right? Whether you agree with it or not, when you cause harm to one community, you cause harm to another community, right? Sorry, I get really emotional about this, but it's hurtful that we are not allowing these conversations to happen in school. And then we always have these answers, like you were saying, like, well, we do this and we do that and we do this, instead of listening. How are we listening and actually helping people heal through honest dialogue and conversation? There is racism, there is homophobia, there is anti-Semitism, right? We're prejudiced against Muslim people. Like we're like all this stuff that's bubbling up, and then we want to say, oh, let's not talk about that. Well, we need to equip people to have these conversations. Otherwise, we'll just keep going and going and going and going and going, and then we'll be here in 10 years going, why are there so many mass shootings? And another thing we haven't talked about, most of the mass shootings are done by white men and white boys. How come we're not having that conversation? Like, this is real. What's happening that we're not addressing the mental health or addressing the concerns of our white male students? That is the majority of who's doing the shootings. It's a problem, but we keep ignoring it and sweeping it under the rug. We don't want to talk about it. We don't really want to say the real deal that's happening. This is some real crap happening, and it's scary, and it's hurtful. And we need to do a better job, and I think this is an example of how we are trying to do a better job, right? So we're doing this on purpose so that we can heal, but healing comes from conversation, it comes from talking, it comes from being vulnerable, it comes from listening to people, listening to why are people feeling the way they're feeling.
Let's listen more now to some of our audience members. I know quite a few people have questions right now, and I want everyone to get a chance to speak tonight. Kyle, I know you've got a... Right there, okay, yes.
So, two things. One is that, so to go back to what they were saying, that we don't talk about the president enough, and like we don't teach them about the religion and stuff. I feel like throughout the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we've been taught that we should be tolerant of these other religions and respect them, but we've never really been taught their history. We've never been taught about them. So you don't hear kids making jokes about Valley Forge because they know the entire story and they know about that. So I feel like if we were taught more about the religions, like the Jewish religion and the Muslim religion, we would be more accepting and more tolerant because we know everything about that. And sorry, one more thing if I could.
No, you keep going. Believe me, don't stop.
So about 2 months ago, I think my school had...
You might have to, hello?
had a threat that some students became aware of. I think the entirety of the message was, I'm going to shoot up the school at 3:15, which is when we get out, at this date. And I know by at least lunchtime, a lot of kids had heard about this and a lot of people were panicking. And one of the things I didn't really see is the teachers didn't really address it. They kind of just said, yeah, we're aware that this is going around. You're fine, don't talk about it. And I feel like they should have addressed it more and been like, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody need anything? Because the teachers and the people running the school not addressing it, we've turned to rumors and gossiping, and a lot of people started pointing fingers and getting bullied for something because it wasn't addressed.
So there's fear coming out of, once again, that lack of communication. And you guys, you want to be heard and you have those questions, and that's really the worst part of the fear is the kids not knowing what's going on, for sure.
So I work in this district. I run an organization working with transgender students, and I appreciate the district's policies on following up on bullying and harassment. But I can tell you from working with the youth that I do, teachers aren't handling it the way that you talked about, Mr. Lemaster, and students are terrified to tell. Our LGBTQ students are terrified to tell anybody about being harassed. And it happens outside of earshot of a teacher and out at lunch and in the hallways. And San Diego Unified has an app that students can actually report bullying on an app. And I would encourage all the San Diego, all the Bowie district people that are here to investigate something where a student doesn't have to go face-to-face to an instructor or to an admin in order to report, so you get more reporting, right? More reporting means knowing better on your campus culture so that you can do better.
So I wanted to circle back to my earlier comment about and having to do with the communication. And I think one of the things that I have an issue with still dropping my son off at school every day is not knowing if that student is still there and if is still capable of doing harm to that school. I was only told that the issue had been addressed and resolved. I'm not sure if that student's still there. Do I still have to fear for my son's life every day when I leave him there? That's the confidence I need to get from you, the district, from the school, to let me know that my child is safe.
It's a really good question, and as a parent, I can completely understand that feeling, wanting to know that A, that the issue is addressed, first of all, and that B, it's not going to happen again to my kid, and that they're going to be safe on that campus. And there are certain laws that prevent us from being able to share information about how we respond specifically to a student or a specific case. However, and I didn't share this earlier when I was talking about following the protocols and working with different resources, but a lot of the work that we do is around the getting the student the help that they need to ultimately address the behavior and change what's causing the student to act a certain way. And so when an administrator says to a parent, I can't tell you what exactly we've done, but we've addressed it, what you can assume is that that the behavior itself has been addressed, and there's been follow-up with the student's parents, finding out, do we need to provide any additional counseling for this individual? Is there a deeper issue that we need to be addressing, or do we need to be reaching out to some of our local professionals and paraprofessionals and say, we've got a student in crisis that we're concerned about. This is their behavior. This is how they're acting out, and we want to try to help fix whatever's going on there. So it's a two-part response when an administrator or somebody says, we've addressed the issue, we've addressed the situation, and as a parent you want to go, well, yeah, what does that look like? Well, know that there's the behavior itself and the consequences or whatever came out of that was followed per ed code, per board policies. But then on the back end of it, that the administrators, the counselors are working with whoever they need to get that student support so that behavior doesn't happen. And maybe it is some training, maybe it is some sensitivity training or something, or a conversation. Maybe it is something that we need to reach out to and get additional supports for to try to address that behavior. But whatever's causing that to take place, and whatever caused that individual to do that to your particular student, we want to fix that and we want to address that. It's not just about addressing the behavior and moving on. It's about making sure that it gets addressed, and also following up to make sure that your student now can be safe on that campus, that your student's not going to have to deal with this anymore, and that you're not going to have your student come home and say, yeah, well, Mom, it happened again today. And I know that sometimes that happens, and when it does, we will continue to work on it. But it is one of those pieces where we want to make sure parents feel confident that we've addressed it and that we're working on the issue so that it doesn't happen again.
But she was mentioning too, though, that she's not getting that confidence because she doesn't feel she's getting all the information.
And I
So
hear that.
would it be fair to say then, in a nutshell, that that's just the way it has to be right now, or is that something that can change?
Well, we can share with parents the resources and things that we have for students in a general sense. We just can't speak specifically about what happens to an individual student when something takes place, if that makes sense.
And then also, I want you to have, I hate to hear that you're dropping your child off and you don't feel safe. We have a great partnership with our law enforcement, and even in elementary schools. If we are really concerned about an action of a student, we involve our law enforcement partners, and they come in and do the investigation. And our district attorney, I mean, she's not taking any threats lightly. She's going into full investigation and taking action. So if that gives you any, I don't know if that gives you any sense of comfort, but it certainly, I have 3 grandchildren going to the elementary school. And it does give me a sense of comfort because I know we have the law enforcement partnership, and I know we have resources, and I am confident that if there's a serious enough threat that an administrator is going to involve law enforcement and they're going to act on it, they're going to be sure that it's thoroughly investigated and kids are safe.
Kyle, you have a question?
Yes, from another student.
So we hear a lot from like our administrators about all the hate that's going around our schools, but I think it's harder for the kids who are like saying rude things or doing mean things to other kids. It's harder for them to hear it from the administrators in like a scolding way or like in a condescending way that what they're doing is wrong. And so what me and Sophie and Ellie are trying to do is instead of just scolding them and like telling them like, no, that's wrong, like you're doing something bad, I think that educating them and giving them a little bit of a better perspective would really change a lot more than just scolding them. Like, for example, we hear a lot of Holocaust jokes at our school. We hear like jokes about like just really mean jokes. I don't want to bring them up, but then the thing that you could say instead of just being like, you're rude, like, shut up, like, don't say that again, like, a lot of the times I just respond with, you know, it only happened 70 years ago. Like, it's really not okay to just talk about it right now. And a lot of the responses I get are like, oh, really? Like, I didn't know that. Like, I thought it happened like a million years ago. Like, I didn't even know. And I was like, yeah, your grandparents might have been alive at that time. And a lot of kids are just really ignorant about what they say. And it gives me a little bit, I've grown up with parents who teach me a lot about the past and parents who teach me a lot about my heritage. And I know other kids who may not know a lot about the Jewish heritage. They like have these thoughts in the back of their head that they hear around school. But the thing that I think is the most important is to teach them instead of scolding them. And I think that would make a big change.
It's a great comment, and that seems to be a common theme here, right? We've heard from a number of students that it's a lack of education about heritages that are not their own. You know, they learn at home about themselves, but they're not learning about others. And maybe if they realize what kind of impact that these insults would have, if they understood what they truly meant, then it would have more of an impact on them, and maybe that would be the beginning of the end. Is that right?
I'd love to invite you to our elementary school. Come and teach our students there. I think that would be powerful for them at this young age to hear from you. It would be phenomenal.
But that sort of speaks to the core curriculum. Then why are these kids being told to respect something that they don't fully understand when, in fact, the resources must be there to give them that understanding? And it's a basic part of education anyway. So I guess the question is, because we've heard from several of them, why isn't it happening?
I can just talk from kind of the county office perspective, and also I've said it a million times probably throughout the course of tonight, but we're not training teachers, and we're not training our staff on how to do it, on how to design curriculum that's culturally relevant, on how to design curriculum that addresses truthfully the history of people and from different perspectives. I will give you an example. Native American history. We see it from one perspective, right? Thanksgiving, we came, I don't know, Western movies that we see, but we don't talk about the trauma that has happened in the Native American community and their perspective, for example, of Thanksgiving and how that actually causes trauma for a lot of Native American people. But most folks walk away. Christopher Columbus, you know, he came to the Americas and he founded Americas and they had this beautiful Thanksgiving dinner. That's not really what happened from the perspective of Native folks, right? But we don't know that necessarily because we talk about history from a very monolithic perspective, from a very white supremacist perspective, and that's just the honest truth. That's the way it is. And so in order for us to really think about it in a different way, hearing from different perspectives, hearing from people who are in history books, but it's not portrayed from their perspective, like how they experienced it, we need to have that. I love the idea of having students come, have Native American students come, have kids come who are trans and have a safe conversation protecting those students at the same time, because there could be trauma in that too. But really starting having those conversations. But I'm going to tell you, as a former principal, we can sit here and say this, but as soon as Poway or any other district starts doing that, you're going to get some parents who are going to be really upset. Who's going to have Poway's back after that? And it's going to happen. And parents get upset. You all might not get upset, but there is going to be more parents than sitting in this room that are going to knock on their door and say, you're talking about LGBTQ youth? You're talking about trans kids? You're talking about Native Americans and how Christopher Columbus really didn't find America? You better be ready. I always say that because people are like, oh, we want to do this. And I'm like, yeah, Let's see what happens when the media is at Poway's door for talking about trans kids. We have to really stand as a community and have their back and say, you know what, this is going to be a hard conversation, but we're going to be in this with you because it's for our kids so that we can stop hate. The more we know about someone else, the more we can empathize. We don't have to agree. And I always say that, you don't have to agree, but I hear you, I'm listening to you, and I'm not going to hate you because of your heritage or because of your experience. So I just want you all to really think about what you're saying to the Poway folks.
I really do want to keep the dialogue going, though, in the audience. I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to make their point. I know this. Go ahead.
So you were talking about earlier people coming from that different space and different spot, and I am that different person. I've had bipolar for 22 years, survivor of that, published 2 books, spoken over 70 speeches from here to Los Angeles, won tons of awards. I feel like I haven't even made a dent. It was just very depressing when I did all my mental health work. I walked away from it 5 years ago. I do run 2 other businesses. I've raised a daughter. She's 12 years old. And I feel like if we can just start talking about mental health with kids at a very young age, it'll make a massive difference. I started talking with my daughter, Allie, about my bipolar when she was 4. So she grew up with a mom that has bipolar 1. My husband is a PE teacher at Patrick Henry. He is that teacher that sees the kids that have issues, and he goes up to them and he talks to them and he gets them counseling. So there are some amazing teachers out there. My daughter, out of the blue this year, turned in a project that I didn't even know she was doing about my heroes around me, and she did it on me. I just thought she was turning it in for a school project. It won 2nd in the state of California about bipolar disorder. So that is just one kid making a difference, right? And that video went viral. And that's little Allie just going through and doing that. And then she talks to her friends about depression, bipolar, anxiety, all of these things that we're seeing. And then you see all these shootings that are happening, and a lot of these kids have mental health problems. And nobody wants to talk about mental health. It's a very lonely illness. It's everybody just kind of puts it on the side. This week, I just was like, I want to do something. So I sat out at Target yesterday with books for free for 4 hours, and people treated me awful. It was awful. I just said, hey, would anybody like a book to help someone else? My book is really good. It's a really good book. I know that. It's been around all over the U.S. And people just give me these looks like, oh, that freak of a lady. It's really real, the stigma of mental health. And I know it goes down to the kids, and the kids don't tell their parents, and the parents don't pay attention to what's happening. And the social media is making it way worse. In my own home, I don't have Allie have a phone. Like, why does a seventh grader need a phone? What's on an iPhone that's good? Really? Do they need to look at Instagram all day as a seventh grader? So she has learned to deal with looking someone in the eye, shaking somebody's hand, having a conversation with her teacher. She loves sports. She plays 3 different sports. So this whole singleization of being good at something, putting your kid in as many, what are those courses that are out in high school? The AP courses so we can get them graduated from college quicker. How about let's just enjoy high school, right? There's so much pressure on kids to be these perfectionists, and it's like major in Poway. So anyways, just coming from a person that does have the mental illness, I feel like it's out there a lot. I've been helping kids one-on-one. I helped a kid last year from Poway High School. He was a disaster, and he was like, Maggie, I told the football team, and they put me over here. So he told his, football team, I have bipolar disorder. He was then pushed to the side. He somehow was able to finish. I was so proud of him this year. He was amazing. He came out in the Chieftain, talked about it. But at school, he's been by himself. Can you imagine that? By himself this year at Poway High, just surviving. We meet at King's Craft. We just talk about things. So I feel like if more people can get out there and talk about mental health, it'll be so huge. And it starts right in the home. And one other thing I feel that's so important, if you can get your kids in positive things, like from the time they're little, like my kid goes to youth group. She started getting her friends to go to youth group. Last week, she got her entire softball team to youth group. There was 12 kids at church going to youth group. So, I do feel like you can make a change. It starts in the home. I don't know, that's all I got to say. There you go.
Kyle?
Barb, I've got a teacher from Rancho Bernardo High right here, Eric.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I am the one that teaches the class here at RB that Dave Lemaster referred to. And I set up an Instagram account called RB The Change because I believe we are the change. It has to start with us, right? And so I want to thank all of you, everyone that's here right now, because a lot of us say we want change, but we're not willing to put forth the effort. All of you put forth the effort, so thank you very much for doing that. To the family over here, I want to assure you that I'm coming from a place of love and not fear. I understand where you're coming from, the concerns that you have, the fear that you have. I just want to assure you that Dave that morning twice announced to the students as well as to the staff that we did have a place to go to talk to people if we needed to. And then we, as teachers, met to discuss how the students approached the event that day. What we found, about 50 of us got into the restorative circle that David mentioned, and a lot of the students said, no, don't want to talk about it, heard enough about it. It was like, this is the norm. And you had suggested, and I think it's a great idea if you haven't been in education, and I'm assuming that you haven't been. I apologize if I assume incorrectly. But when you incentivize students to come to an event like this, it's disingenuous a lot of times. And I think a lot of times what happens is you have people speaking to the students directly, as opposed to the students getting to speak to one another. And we could have students come here from different backgrounds and talk to a whole audience of students, but again, they're being spoken to. What I'm finding from my class is that when students can get into small triads or groups of 4 and talk with one another and share their commonalities, that's where the connection comes from. No label that they see on social media, no label of you're this race, you're this religion, blah, blah, blah. No, here are commonalities. Let's talk about suicide. Let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about romantic relationships. Let's talk about our relationship with mom and dad. And hear how one another, or each of us, has these challenges that are very similar. And that's where the connection I'm finding from my class is coming from. And so that's what I would encourage us to do in this district and outside this district, is to allow these students to come into smaller groups and then get comfortable sharing in those small groups and expand it to larger groups and go from there. All right? Thank you very much for listening, guys.
Thank you, Art.
Go ahead, Steve.
I don't know if I lost my mic, but I love what you're doing with this class, because I think it's all about creating the right culture. I have 3 kids, and I think you hit it on the head. Parents are so focused on, my kid has to take AP classes. My kid has to be able to get a 1600 on the SAT. And all they're focused on when their kid is at school is getting the reading, the writing, whatever they need to get a good score on these tests. And the parents don't want a period that's not focused on that to focus on what's really important about building culture and setting the right example. When you said at the beginning about having a circle time, that to me is huge, especially in elementary school, to get these kids started on the right track. And then they get into middle school, and the teachers don't start the day in front of a class where everybody's staring at them. They're having conversations before they even get to what their topic is. Sorry, so I think what you're doing is great, and it's a great start, but it's too late to have one class in high school where you're getting to this. It has to start in kindergarten, and it has to filter its way all the way up through the entire culture.
I know if one of you could make your way over here, we have more people on the other side of the room also that wanted to.
So as that's happening, I want to encourage parents, because I'm not a member of the school district, right? And again, as a member of the mental health community, I want to encourage parents to speak with members of the school board, because that's where these policies and procedures come from. What you're talking about in terms of having more character building, empathy building, conversation development, like social skills, coping skills development, mental health in the schools, that has to come from the board down, starting in elementary up. And there are going to be competing interests, because there are going to be parents there who say that's not what school is for. School is there to get my kid into college. If they need that, they can go to your therapy and then just be done with it. And you're going to have other parents who say, no, this is an integral part. If the board does not hear that other side, they're only going to hear the side that says, why is my kid not getting into Harvard? And my response is always, well, if your kid gets into Harvard and then attempts suicide, it's all for naught. Or if you have to use their college education finances to pay for rehab, it's all for naught. And that's a powerful message to talk to the board about, because the policies that tie a lot of our educators' hands have to do with not having the funding or the time or the classes. Positive psychology is not a mandatory course for all kids in high school. And so if we want our children to have access to this, which I absolutely agree with as a mental health professional, it is vital. We need to actually get our decision makers at the top on board with it so that our schools can start implementing it. Because having one school here and one class there isn't enough. And getting those families, all of these families in the room that do this in our homes, that do this starting with our children in our homes, and showing them the positive impact that this could have in a school setting is huge. So please reach out, because those are the decision makers that we need to persuade.
All right, thanks. And we have some more people that want to join in the conversation over here. Did you get your microphone working, Steve?
I wanted to just follow up on that exactly. Mr. Lemaster is up here representing the school, and I think he's doing an amazing job of being the face today. And it has been a very difficult road for Poway Unified School District specifically. So I'm very grateful that you do stand up there and you do take a lot of very difficult questions, and you're taking some heat from some issues that really do go back to our school board and that really should be involving our elected officials and our law enforcement. To that end, you know, the kids, I think at least what they tell me they want to see is who spray painted all that graffiti all over our school. 20 instances of swastikas, KKK, there's going to be a shooting here. We had a forum about it. Still, people don't know. Are those people still at large? Was the current shooter involved in that in any way? Is there a group of people in our community? Was anybody arrested? I can on my own call law enforcement and I can get some answers, and I can call and talk to some of the elected officials because I know some of them, but that's not enough for all of the parents, and it's certainly not enough for the kids who do feel like nothing ever happens. Somebody's writing swastikas on the walls, whether it's big graffiti or they're just doing it to harass one particular Jewish kid, and nothing happens. Nobody finds out who it was. Nobody seems to be punished, not because there's a sense for vengeance and we want somebody to, well, obviously we want people who are doing that to be held accountable, but it would be wonderful if they could come back or be shown that this was the wrong thing to do, I learned from it, and these were the consequences and I'm not going to do it anymore. So I don't know that anybody particularly has to answer that. I think Channel 8 is doing an incredible job of bringing this to light, and you do some great reporting and you all do ask those difficult questions, but that's really what a lot of parents in this community want to know, is who's being arrested, what exactly is happening, how do we prevent another school shooting, and we do need to look at these safety plans. I know that the site plans were introduced after that last assembly we had, and our school board president at that time noted that there was mention of meetings happening on February 30th. There isn't a February 30th. They were full of typos. They weren't taken seriously. Not to point fingers, but maybe that just wasn't such a big issue at that time. But we didn't have our plans updated. We sat here and another board member said, we are totally updated with our safety plan. I walked down and looked at the safety plan and it said 2015. It's not updated. I called Captain Duckworth myself and said, are you coordinating with the school district? Where's Mayor Falconer? Where's Mayor Voss? This school's actually in the city of San Diego, although it's in Poway Unified School District. And I'm really grateful that Superintendent Phelps did announce at or say at a board meeting, we don't have our plan updated. Our eyes are open. We're going to do better. I know that you as one principal can't answer all of that, and it's many years of issues, but now we're talking about our kids, like you said, being able to come home to us, and we all need to make sure that there isn't a tragedy that happens again.
Do we have somebody else that wanted to say something before we continue?
We're here as a community. And as a community, I think it starts with us. Action. It starts with us letting ourselves come to terms with ourselves. My issues are not important right now. It's our issues that are important, because as a community, we're failing. We need to come to terms with what we can do. Action. Prayer. Involvement, connectivity, and of course, love. Because communication does not have to be just via digital media. It starts with us going home to our families, to our neighbors, to our family members, and saying something. Believing in what we say has meaning and purpose. And most importantly, experience, and whatever all you had to offer is great, but what we need is also sharing of that experience. Taking our kids and volunteering, taking our kids to old folks' homes, or wherever our grandparents may be kept, or hidden from public view. It's a matter of us believing in who we are as a family, disconnected, misinterpreted, disempowered, but believing in the fact that we have a say. We all have a story to tell. And what I like to say, we're the hero in that story. I used to work mental health. I am bipolar. I believe in peer support. I was a peer support specialist. And Mental Health America, I think, had the opportunity to share mental health first aid, which is very simple to learn, very simple to offer. NAMI has involvement meetings where people just go to a meeting and share about not just their family members, but how they can get into action and solutions. And that's what we're about. Here as a community, we're about solutions. We didn't come just to listen to them. We came to voice ourselves, share whatever it is we have to say, and feel validated for what we have to say. And my daughter has every right to go to school and not be ostracized, bullied, which she has been for several years, and favoritism on the part of the schools. Because I'm not trying to point fingers, but Point Loma and the affluent community of Point Loma, there is not an equal say in who stays and who goes in these schools. Because some contribute some money to the school or have been members of the school board or have been alum does not mean you have more representation for your student than my student, who might come from the inner city. So if she can, I would like her to say something because she was holding up her hand for a while. And I think she has a voice, just like everyone.
Hi, I'm actually delighted to be here tonight because I've lived in the area for 50 years. And I was on the San Diego Advisory Board approximately 25 years ago dealing with the same subject. And here it's slapping me in the face again, which is most difficult to handle. I have never cried so much in all my life as I did last weekend. And I'm still crying over it. And I do want you to know that the Poway Unified School District is a great school district. I know from experience, I watched it being built. I watched Temple Adat Shalom being a house before it got a temple. So that tells you I've been here a long time. However, the children in this district, I really marvel at them because they are great students. I'm on that campus almost every other day, and I love every one of them. And as parents, I do think you've got nothing to be ashamed of when it comes to your children telling you what their problem is, because their problem is real. I didn't have the digital system like they have to deal with now, and it's most difficult. There's nothing like me watching my grandson with this thing, and I'm trying to talk to him, and he's trying to watch it. So you really got your hands full. But believe me, if there is anybody who can work through this, it's the Poway Unified School District. Believe me. Believe me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that with us tonight. We are winding down on our time this evening. Is there anyone else that wanted to share something with us that didn't get a chance to speak? I don't want anyone to leave. I love hearing from the kids and the parents, everybody.
I'm going to put my parent hat on. I work for the district, just to be totally transparent. But there was an aspect that I didn't feel like was addressed, and we do have an expert on it. One of the most terrifying things for me as a parent was to see the suspect in this situation access these hateful websites and just really descend into that pit of hate and be influenced by that. And so I'm wondering if the panel can just address how can we as parents keep a better eye on that? How can we prevent access to that? How can we do better?
I can answer that, but you're not going to like the answer. The suspect was 19 years old. There's absolutely nothing that those parents can do because those websites, those platforms, 8chan, 4chan, Gab, all those platforms on the dark side of the web that are hate-filled, they have no policies. You can put out whatever you want. And that's where this person was self-radicalized. I think we can try as parents, and I'm a mom of 3, I think we can try to keep an eye on what our kids are doing. It's really very hard. I think that more the aspect of what you can look for in behavioral changes, and I'm not a therapist, but Facebook just kicked off a bunch of haters off of their platform. They can do that, so it's not a free speech issue, right? Because it's not government, it's private, so they can kick off haters. I think you can appeal to those platforms that your kids are using to kick the haters off. We've done it. It's starting to work. The other side of the web, there's almost nothing you can do. Sorry.
I just wanted to make a point about what you said, because I'm raising a white boy, and with my husband, of course, and I want to make sure that he's empathetic, and I feel so bad for that family. I don't know that family. I don't want to listen to the rumors about that family, but I really feel for them, because just like your point is, it's white men who are committing these crimes. And my son, he plays baseball, and he has gone to his late start days very early to listen to the same program on when you're a down and out athlete, here's how you pull yourself up by the bootstraps and be that athlete that you want to be. He's heard that time and time again. But he came home and he wondered why someone is calling the Holocaust a hoax and why they're saying it's not true. And my 6th grader said, well, there was a student who came to our school and talked about the Holocaust, right? Her grandparents were in it. And so she was really moved. But back to the woman who was talking about speaking. I mean, my daughter was moved from a teenager, but I think my freshman son would be equally moved hearing from someone who was a Holocaust survivor, even more so than the daughter or the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor. And I think we have to mix it up, because there are a lot of different groups and segments of our population that are giving a lot of attention, and they need that attention. But we can't be remiss of the white men who are hanging out with their athletes and who are full of testosterone and are getting the same messages, but they too need to be included to make sure that they are empathetic, that they understand what some of these I hear what the coaches say to them, and it's coming out of his mouth, quite frankly. And I'm not bashing any coaches. Oh my gosh, I hope they're not here. But, so it's just a trend, and we need to make sure that they're included in all of these types of programs to make sure that they have an open heart to everybody as well.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think we have time for one or two more, and then we're going to have to wrap it up. We are well over our 9 o'clock mark now.
Could I
Yes.
respond to this lady's
Yes.
question down here about the? I don't know what the family had in place in the home of the perpetrator, but I do know that there's software for your home, for all the phones. I have it with all my children. I have a safeguard on our Wi-Fi at home. Well, I have parental guards, right? And also on their phones, you can have software. So on my computer, I can see all their texts, all their phone calls, all their contacts, all their pictures, all the websites. I can block certain websites. We can block these websites. I don't know if are you smiling, smirking, or agreeing? Uh-huh. Well, let me just say this. My son, who's at UCSD right now, and he is sharp as a tack. After he moved out, we had an honest conversation. And I said, so did you get around my software? He said, I couldn't do it. So we can't stop everything, but we're not helpless. And so, as I said, I can see everything they're doing on all their electronics. And so there are tools that are helpful, is my point.
I want to go back to what the young people were saying, though, because I think from their perspective, the problem isn't being blocked from information. They need more information. They're asking for better education and more information, access to resources, things like that. And I think you can address this. If that's touched on first and they have a better understanding and a higher level of sensitivity for what's going on around them and other cultures and everything, that almost makes that inaccessibility to dark things on the internet a moot point, because they'll have that education, they will have that wherewithal. So instead of this notion of blocking first, our most important things that I've heard this evening has come from the young people. They want more, and I think at the end of all of this, we could sum it up by saying, I think a lot of you just feel like you're not being heard. And it's time we listen to you. I think that's pretty much all the time we have. I thank everybody who did come out this evening. I think you shared some wonderful stuff with us. Yes, absolutely, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, hello. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm a proud parent of an RBHS senior, thank you.
Principal Lemaster, and I've been a counselor in San Diego Unified for 21 years. The most impactful program that I've ever been a part of in my district, unfortunately, has gone away due to lack of funding. It was sponsored by the National Conference for Christians and Jews. It was called Camp Minitown, and eventually it spread to Camp Anytown. It was a time for kids from all over our district to come together, representatives. They spent a weekend in Julian, like 6th grade camp, and they had time to really spend with each other and break down barriers and learn about tolerance and learn about each other's cultures and face those issues of bias and bigotry head on. We don't have the time for that anymore because we're cramming, those AP tests and, but thank you, Principal Lemaster, for encouraging those times of, take the day off for the HRC and you brought it to the juniors and, that's a similar program, but, at least we're trying something, I think I would like to see programs like that be brought back to our kids where they can take time away. We send them to 6th grade camp, but time away to get to know other kids from the, like we started off this conversation from outside of the community to expose them to different cultures and religions. So more funding needs to be on things like that rather than just, more talk. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you once again to...
Barb, before you
yes.
wrap it up, I would like us all once again to acknowledge the young people in the room.
I just wanted to say that. Thank you so much for coming out this evening because your messages, I think we just heard a lot of things from you that maybe we suspected or we weren't aware of at all, and I thank you so much. And on that note, I also really want to thank every member of this panel for taking the time to come here this evening, share their education, their information with you, and listen to your thoughts and concerns. So thank you once again to our panel, and thank you for coming out. Have a good evening.